Saqqara is one of the iconic sites of ancient Egypt because it was used throughout Egyptian history and is first and foremost a vast necropolis, a burial ground not only for the pharaohs but for private citizens too. This site is obviously dominated by Pharaoh Djoser's huge funerary complex, which occupies the central area with its pyramid, enclosure wall, and various ceremonial structures. And here, in this part of the desert, we have the Serapeum. The Serapeum is a cult complex devoted to the Apis bull. And this Serapeum included not only temples and chapels, but also, and above all, a necropolis devoted exclusively to the Apis bull.
This is the story of a sacred bull interred in a mysterious underground necropolis. In the Saqqara Desert, a few kilometers from the city of Cairo, the tomb of the sacred bulls was discovered in 1850 by the French Egyptologist Auguste Mariette. There he found dozens of magnificent artifacts shared between Egypt and France, some of which are now housed in Paris's Louvre Museum. And he would likely have discovered many more if one of the underground passages had not collapsed, rendering part of the necropolis inaccessible. Today, a team from the Louvre Museum is picking up where Auguste Mariette left off. Some 30 workers, supervised by the Rais, the excavation's foreman, and a dozen French and Egyptian scientists. The dig began a few days ago. The aim is to find the entrance to the unexplored part of the tomb of the sacred bulls.
This is a sandy area, not surprisingly since we're in the Saqqara Desert. And we're in the process of removing this layer of sand in order to reach the plateau, the uppermost layer of rock. And if we're doing this right here, it's because we want to work underneath, in what's beneath our feet, namely a large underground gallery comprised of a central corridor with lateral chambers each side of it. So we're currently clearing the entire area, the surface above these galleries, in order to find the location of the collapse.
This collapse, the one that prevented Auguste Mariette from completing his excavation, likely occurred a very long time ago. Even today, it means part of what are now known as the lesser vaults is inaccessible.
This is the descending passage leading to the lesser vaults. It's a kind of artificial canyon carved out of the rock by humans in order to descend to the level necessary for digging this huge underground gallery. We're now in the lesser vaults of the Serapeum. In other words, this underground gallery in which the sacred Apis bulls, the sacred bulls of the god Ptah, were interred. This gallery is an ideal shelter for all of our activities, all of the behind-the-scenes work, the work that's not in the open, not in the spotlight, but which is essential in any archaeological mission, the documentation work. Behind me is Audrey, who photographs the artifacts excavated from the site, and behind her there's Patricia, who's in charge of documentation, and Amira Hamdi, who is Egyptian, and a member of our Franco-Egyptian mission. The pair of them record all of the artifacts.
And I think we have another block from last season, which is almost the same.
This gallery was begun in the reign of Ramses II in the 19th dynasty, in the New Kingdom period. It was Ramses II's son, Kamweset, who initiated the construction of an underground catacomb consisting of a long central gallery lined with separate side chambers for each Apis bull. You have to imagine that the ceiling of this chamber was once roughly level with my head. There still remains of plaster on the walls. The walls were coated with this pinkish plaster. And when you see this, you understand how a chimney can form over time in the rock, shatter it, and cause the surface to collapse. And that's what happened a bit further down the corridor.
This is where the accessible part of the gallery ends. It is still possible to squeeze through, but the ceilings are extremely fragile. It's dangerous and, of course, impossible to work in here.
We've reached the end. Well, not of the tunnel, because we're only halfway along it, but this is as far as we can go. When Mariette came here, the ceiling had already collapsed, but he managed to crawl around the rubble to see the end of the gallery. He was able to measure it too. We know that it's roughly 68 meters long and that there are also side chambers, just like in the first part of the vault. It's impossible to get through here now. And so we're now looking on the surface for this doline or sinkhole, the interruption, the rupture in the rock ceiling, which corresponds underneath to this hole here, and presumably to the extensive collapse through which the sand entered. The desert sand. In other words, the sand that's on the surface and which, as a result, is preventing us from going any further.
The Louvre Museum's Egyptologists intend to clear out the rubble from the surface in order to explore the inaccessible section of the underground vaults. This is where they hope to find several sacred bull graves, and maybe even an intact tomb with all of its grave goods. In this way, they would complete the excavations begun by their distant predecessor. He too was sent by the Louvre to Saqqara over 170 years ago. Auguste Mariette, the pioneer of scientific archaeology in Egypt.
I think he really stood out from the rest. Not only physically, we actually know his height. He was 1.83 meters tall, which was big for the time. And he wasn't in great health, and he had a bit of a bad back. He held himself like so. It's easy to recognize him on the old photos, even those without captions, because of his very characteristic posture. He had pale blue eyes. With his skin tanned by the desert sun, his imposing height, and those eyes of his, I think he must have been very striking.
20 years after his first expedition to Egypt, Auguste Mariette described the circumstances of his discovery. While staying in Cairo and Alexandria, he was invited to the homes of several Egyptian dignitaries. These cultured and wealthy men all had small, identical sphinxes in their gardens. Sphinxes that Mariette immediately associated with the account of a famous author of antiquity, the geographer Strabo, who visited Saqqara in the 1st century CE. He mentions a temple reached via a long processional way flanked by hundreds of statues with lions' bodies and human heads.
This temple is in a spot so sandy that the wind causes the sand to accumulate in heaps, under which we could see many sphinxes. Some of them almost entirely buried, others only partially covered, from which we may conjecture that the route leading to this temple might be attended with danger if one was surprised by a sudden gust of wind.
Thanks to Strabo's description, he made an assumption, and he was correct. He assumed that they were the sphinxes of the Serapeum, and his excavation proved him right.
Auguste Mariette followed the path that Strabo had indicated. He saw a sphinx protruding from the sand, then unearthed its pair. Every 6 meters, as he related in his account, he found 2 new statues. Along the way, he made several spectacular discoveries. Tombs, some of which contained masterpieces of ancient Egyptian art.
He describes, for instance, how he found a shaft to the north of the Alley of Sphinxes in which there were a number of statues dating to the Old Kingdom, including the Louvre's seated scribe, which has nothing to do with the Serapeum. It was a perk of his dig. When trying to find a sphinx, he came across something else whilst clearing the sand.
The far end of the Alley of Sphinxes goes around a small hill. Here, in ancient times, there was a processional way flanked by several chapels leading to the sanctuary's entrance. Among the ruins of these monuments, Auguste Mariette found the statue of a bull, now housed in the Louvre Museum. It was the representation of an Apis. This was proof to Mariette that his goal, the necropolis of the sacred bulls, was within his reach. But before reaching it, he had a final surprise. Some 300 bronze statuettes buried beneath the processional way and the necropolis's enclosure wall. These included, for instance, statuettes of Imhotep, the architect of Djoser's step pyramid, who was deified long after his death. As well as representations of the Apis bull, to which the Serapeum is dedicated. In Saqqara, the rumor was that these statuettes were made of gold, and Mariette made others green with envy.
His rivals said, "We're going to have problems with this guy. He isn't like us." And Mariette found his excavation banned. The authorities demanded a firman from him. He was furious because this was not something they asked of the other archaeologists who were busy digging holes in the desert. He actually says as much in his letters.
Mariette was not granted a firman or official permit. So from then on, he conducted his excavation at night. And he eventually unearthed the tomb of the sacred Apis bulls, starting with the most monumental section of the catacomb. Known today as the Greater Vaults.
He entered the burial vaults at night, the night of November 12, 1851, I believe. And that night, he explored the vaults. They were accessible then, not filled with sand. He documented everything immediately, counted the number of monumental stone sarcophagi. He found 16. He counted the number of niches for these sarcophagi, which he named chambers, and he found 28. This gave him a rough idea of the layout of the tombs of the sacred bulls of the god Ptah, which he had found after searching for an entire year.
The greater vaults occupy the largest part of the building, but also the most recent. The sacred bulls were interred here from the 7th century BCE to Cleopatra's era, 700 years later.
We know that in the lesser vaults, the coffins in which the Apis bulls were interred were made of wood. But by wood, I mean carpentry, marquetry, cabinetry. It was exquisite work, very ornate, intricately carved. And then, for reasons of luxury, for ceremonial reasons, they decided to go for something monumental, hence these huge sarcophagi. One of the explanations could be that there was a desire to return to very ancient models, those of the Old Kingdom, when sovereigns were interred in enormous rectangular stone coffins. Year 2, 3rd month of the season of Akhet, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khabash, living eternally, the friend of Apis Osiris, of Horus of Kakem. These burial vaults fell out of use 2,000 years before Mariette arrived. And you can imagine what can happen in the space of 2,000 years. The fact is, everything was looted, and I mean completely plundered. There's absolutely nothing left. Nothing remains of the mummies or of the grave goods that were buried with the bulls. All that is left are these monumental coffins, these sarcophagi. But there's also another astonishing ensemble which evidently did not interest anyone at the time. And that's the steles, what we now call the Serapeum steles. And the steles of this type come in all sizes. They can be as small as this or 1.5 meters high.
Auguste Mariette found several hundred steles in the underground galleries of the Serapeum. Most are dedicated to the sacred bull Apis by private citizens. But some, the most monumental, were dedicated to Apis by the pharaoh himself. Embedded in the walls, or placed on the ground, they accompanied the bull at his funeral. These funerals were significant events in the region of Memphis, the largest city in ancient Egypt, which lay a few kilometers away in the valley. There is nothing left of the ancient city save the remains of its vast religious complex.
Standing before these ruins today, it is hard to imagine that we are in one of the most important monuments in the history of Egyptian civilization.
The Apis bull once lived in this huge structure and was the object of a cult, along with Ptah, one of the ancient Egyptians' creator gods.
The temples of the Egyptian Delta all met the same fate. They were used for millennia as quarries. There was granite here, quartzite, all sorts of rock useful for construction. And this explains the advanced state of destruction of these monuments today.
This is what the Temple of Ptah might have looked like in the days of Ramses II. A huge walled compound, 2 colossal statues of the pharaoh, and a monumental gate greeted visitors. Then a vast space whose roof was supported by giant columns. The Hypostyle Hall, one of the largest in all of Egypt. In the center of the temple, a chapel, the Naos, hewn from a block of granite, inside of which was the deity. The effigy of the god Ptah, entirely covered with gold leaf. Only a select few were entitled to come here to venerate it.
Ptah created the universe, according to a principle known to us through the Bible, for instance. He named things. He created the universe by naming things, thanks to the power of the word.
The god Ptah, creator of the universe, was inaccessible for the vast majority of Egyptians, who possessed neither the words nor the rituals to communicate with him. He was a mysterious force out of reach to all except the pharaoh and high-ranking priests. However, everyone could communicate with the Apis bull, who served as an intermediary. In a manner of speaking, Apis was the god Ptah's representative among the living. When an Apis died, he was replaced by a new bull, chosen by the Egyptian priests who identified him as the incarnation of Ptah, thanks to a number of special markings.
The bull had to have a certain mark on its tongue, a crescent moon on the forehead, as well as markings on the back, and so on. Together, these signs were proof that the bull was indeed the new incarnation. Once identified, the Apis bull was taken to Memphis and kept in a sacred stable where he was attended by a staff of priests. They took care of him his entire life until he died.
In his temple, the god Ptah possessed a protected area. However, the Egyptians could approach his intercessor, the Apis bull, pray to him, put questions to him about the future, and make offerings. Ptah was a remote deity, Apis a god of the everyday. Back to the excavation of the Serapeum. After 2 weeks' work, the first surprises emerge under 2 meters of sand.
It turns out that what we have here is not an irregular rupture front, but something cut, very rectilinear, and which into the bargain appears to have been coated with a layer of muna, a type of lime plaster used to level walls. In fact, it's a rather shallow pit, and this pit was hollowed out of this layer of limestone and given a floor. In other words, the bottom of it was smoothed, but for what purpose, that remains a mystery. However, we have a lot of pottery fragments which we've excavated, as well as a piece of pottery that appears to be intact, or complete at any rate, which is still in place. We'll remove it later in order to determine its relationship to the rest of the site.
Literally embedded in the rock, what is this complete piece of pottery doing here? Is there a link with the surrounding pit? A pit that may have contained vases used for ceremonies, for instance. For now, no one knows the answer. And the mystery thickens the following day when, a few meters from the piece of pottery, 2 statuettes are unearthed. 2 statuettes that appear to have been forgotten or quite simply discarded.
We've reached the upper level of the rock at last, and here we have 2 statuettes. On the right, a terracotta funerary servant, and on the left, a small figurine that appears to be made of limestone. We'll know more once we've removed it. It's possible that it's a funerary servant, but it could be something else entirely. We can only see its back for now, so we'll see. Funerary servants were small figurines that were placed in tombs with the deceased in order to serve them in the afterlife and to carry out all manner of tasks required by the deceased. The Egyptians were extremely practical people, and so they made sure that their afterlife would be as comfortable and as peaceful as possible, so they thought of everything and took funerary servants with them.
This type of statuette, dressed in a long apron, is an overseer.
Magnificent.
He was responsible for coordinating the work of the other servants in the afterlife.
He's slightly damaged.
Isn't it superb?
Yes. And its polychrome decoration is well preserved. It's a limestone statuette, a male figure with a long wraparound ankle-length skirt.
A few hours after the find, Oussama Sabri, the expedition's Egyptian restorer, sets about cleaning the statuette. And he reveals details concealed beneath the crust of sand.
This statuette is highly original. The entire figure is well executed, including the back. And it has a small base on which his feet and the whole statuette rest. It's definitely a funerary servant, but of a fairly rare type. It holds 2 accessories which are not common on funerary servants. The Djed pillar, which is the symbol of Osiris, and on the other side, a teat knot. The teat knot is the symbol of Isis.
The statuette dates to the Ramessid dynasty. It is about 3,000 years old. The following day on the dig, the team achieves its first objective. The workers have uncovered half of the collapsed area. And a clue on its perimeter immediately catches the eye of the Louvre's Egyptologists. A clue that sets them on the trail of Ramses II's oldest son, Prince Kamweset,
شكرا مسري. زيك عبد النبي.
ازيك يا دكتورة؟
شغل جميل.
احنا كده تمام.
أيوة. On cherchait le trou.
We were looking for the hole, and we found it. I'm standing in the middle of the spot where the ceiling of the lesser vaults underground collapsed. Beneath my feet, we have the lesser vault's main corridor. On the sides, the ceilings of the side chambers have also caved in. And where we were hoping it might just be a limited collapse, we now realize that it's actually extensive. And what is very interesting here is that all around the collapsed area, there are heterogeneous, irregular surfaces. The rock crumbled and fell. But here, we have something rather special, because this is not rubble from a collapse, it's cut stone. Here we are in the middle of the lesser vault's main corridor. We're above the collapse that Mariette saw in his day. He managed to go a bit further, but we're not able to for the time being. And among the rubble from the collapsed ceiling, Mariette actually found what is now known as Camouazet's treasure, which is a collection of jewelry, of amulets, and the remains of what at the time was still a mummy covered with a gold mask. Everything apart from the mummy is now housed in the Louvre Museum. No one has ever understood how all of these artifacts, these lavish grave goods, came to be in the necropolis of the sacred bulls. It's not implausible to imagine that Camouazet's tomb was located somewhere above the underground gallery, cut in the rock, that it collapsed at the same time as the lesser vault's ceilings, and that its contents spilled out inside the lesser vaults. It's just a theory, of course. But it's true that when you find something like this, in this spot, in other words, at this depth and in this location, you can't help but dream.
8 artifacts, once part of Camouazet's treasure, were discovered in 1853 by Auguste Mariette. If the theory of the prince's tomb checks out, other artifacts could well be buried somewhere among the rubble. The excavation continues. It is time for the Egyptologists to come back to the piece of pottery whose upper part was freed a few days ago.
It's really strange. It looks as if it's set in a small taffler ring.
It certainly does. It's ever so fragile, but it appears to be intact. We'll see when we reach the bottom, and it isn't impossible that it will break, because it's full of sand, so it's very heavy, and the terracotta is evidently weakened. We'll try to remove it ever so carefully. The great thing is that it still has its lid, which is broken, but we can clearly see the fragments of the lid which are slightly sunken.
Shams ya Reis.
سليم مبروك مبروك يا مديرة مبروك يا مديرة
مبروك يا ريس
مبروك.
What could be in it?
In my humble opinion, nothing. Then again, these types of pots were everyday pottery that were used to preserve foodstuffs, that sort of thing. So it's possible we'll find a few organic remains. Maybe some seeds or the remains of fruit. It's certainly possible. At the same time, it's also possible that it was left here and that it filled with sand when it was empty. We could be in for a surprise tomorrow.
Could Hélène Guichard be wrong? Could the jar possibly contain ancient artifacts? The following morning, Elisabeth David and Oussama Sabri explore the jar's contents. And it has a wonderful surprise in store.
There we go. It appears to contain small statuettes that look like shabtis. For now, we can see 4 heads, and when I dip my spoon in it to remove the sand, I can feel a little bit of resistance underneath. But as we saw on the site yesterday, the jar does not stop here, it goes down a fair way. So there's room for a second layer. It's starting to look like a clock face. There are tops of heads sticking out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Apart from the shabtis that were just above this, we really do have a small circle of heads, all at the same level. It's rather cute.
So, let's go. The sand.
But what's already certain is that the 2 shabtis whose heads appeared first, those that are at the very top, belong to the same individual. They're of the same type, and their inscriptions start in the same way, and I think the third will too. So it is possible that it is a series belonging to one individual.
So far we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
11.
Before removing the statuettes, Oussama sets about consolidating the paint on the terracotta surface. The very fine layer of paint is flaking in places. He has to collect it and replace it. Here on the inscription indicating the individual's name.
Nebet's père, Mout. This is a Mout. C'est une dame.
It's a lady. It's a woman.
C'est une dame.
Mrs. Mout. At least I think it is. Nebet's père is the mistress of the house, and I'm sure the sign is a Mout. Welcome, Mrs. Mout.
The first statuette to be removed from the jar is an overseer, an individual who supervised the ordinary servants, still dressed in the costume of the living. In the afterlife, each overseer would head a team of 10 workers, recognizable by their mummy-like appearance. Once removed, Oussama administers first aid to them.
This is the end of the arrangement. We can clearly see that they started with this one and then arranged the others in a spiral around the inside of the jar, which is not quite vertical. It was less orderly after, but this is a really amusing arrangement. It's worth making a record of it.
There are 12 statuettes in all, 2 overseers and 10 workers, 1 for each day of the Egyptian week.
This inscription is complete, which means we have the whole formula. Sehej Uzia, may the Osiris be illuminated, mistress of the house, Mut. And probably Shed, because it goes all the way to the feet. So she wasn't just called Mut, but Mut and Shed. Theophoric names, that is, compound names that contain a divine name, like this lady's name, were common in the Third Intermediate Period, from the 11th to the 7th century BCE.
The way in which this Shabti box is put together provides us with information. Because although the principle was the same for millennia, the way of doing things changed from one period to the next. There were literally fashions. Methods practiced in one period, abandoned after a while, replaced by others. So the actual form of this Shabti box is interesting, as it enables us to date the burial by comparison. This type of Shabti box tells us it was a modest burial. But you have to understand what I mean by modest. The deceased belonged to the middle class. Already, to have a Shabti box such as this, they would have had to be one of the happy few, but within the lower echelons of this middle class.
The funerary servants have left the jar in which they were stored for some 3,000 years. This contact with the atmosphere is a brutal shock for their surfaces, which require lengthy attention from Usama.
From what I can see, these inscriptions have lost the binder used to fix the color, the product the ancient Egyptian artist applied. I'm now trying to fix the characters on the pottery surface. A name on a Shabti gives it a new life. We discover an object with this information, the information that the ancient Egyptians wanted to pass on to us or wanted to pass on into the afterlife.
It will take Usama several hours to fix the paint on these statuettes. He will then hand over every last one to the Egyptian authorities responsible for their conservation. Back to the dig. The Louvre's Egyptologists have already cleared part of the site. Now the entire perimeter of the collapsed area is being exposed.
جبل موجود. الحمد لله ده كويس.
We've hit the rock. That's the first good news today. And after all this sand, the terrain is changing. And it's changing just as we expected. Now that the modern road via which tourists access the site has been demolished and rebuilt a short distance away, we've been able to clear that section. And we can now go and look underneath to find the entire perimeter of the collapsed area of this depression. In 2 days' time, this huge mass of sand will have been removed, and our site will be clearly visible, and we'll have a much clearer picture.
Meanwhile, the team continues to excavate above the underground gallery in order to lighten the load on its ceilings. And in the northern part of the collapsed area, the workers and the Rais Ahmed make a new discovery.
يا مديرة.
ممكن شابتي؟
ممكن يا مديرة شابتي.
It's a funerary servant with a bull's head. This type is only found in the Serapeum. It's a servant of the Osiris Apis, or Osir Apis, the deceased Apis bull. But it's quite far from the lesser vaults. But it means that looters and other visitors to the site left a few artifacts behind here, including some wonderful surprises. Because this one's beautiful. Right, let's remove it now. It's intact too.
مبروك يا مديرة.
مبروك ها. مبروك انت.
مبروك. حاجة كويسة.
جميلة.
جميل جدا.
ويسلم.
الحمد لله سليم.
There are so many looted relics, so many discarded artifacts around this hole, that it's obvious that even though it was by no means easy to access the lesser vaults in this way, many people sneaked in through here to visit the vaults and see if there was anything worth taking.
In the space of a few days, 2 sacred bull shaptis are discovered on the dig. In the 19th century, Auguste Mariette found 100 or so. At the time of its burial, each Apis bull would probably have had a complete set of funerary servants, just like any high-ranking figure. But how were they arranged? How were the sacred bull's grave goods laid out? Auguste Mariette discovered a single intact tomb in the Serapeum. He chanced upon it while exploring the lesser vaults.
The very first Apis bulls to have been buried in Saqqara were not interred in the lesser vaults or, of course, in the greater vaults. They were buried in what are known as isolated tombs. We know of 6 isolated tombs. So these were not communal underground tombs or catacombs. They really were individual tombs in which there were 1, 2, 3, or 4 bulls, but no more. When Mariette discovered the lesser vaults, he realized that one of the walls sounded hollow when he took his pickaxe to it. And as a result, he found the very last isolated tomb, the one in which 2 bulls from the reign of Ramses II were buried. When Auguste Mariette opened the canopic jars, when he removed their lids, he found a black resinous tar-like substance in them. What's interesting is that he also reported the presence of a great quantity of gold flakes. This proves that the ancient Egyptians spared no expense when it came to sending the sacred bull into the afterlife.
In this isolated tomb, Mariette collected these magnificent objects, but he did not keep the mummy or the contents of the canopic jars. The Egyptologists now hope to find another intact tomb in order to better understand how the sacred bulls were interred. Last day of the dig at the Serapeum, and a spectacular turn of events. At the very last moment, the Rais Ahmed spots a passage large enough to crawl into the lesser vaults.
الجبل معانا اهوت يوسع الباب تمام شد لي هنا شد يا شد يا شد يا شد هنا اسحب 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 قوي قوي قوي.
It's always like this on the last day. We sift through sand for weeks on end, and then on the last day, interesting things start to appear. We're just going to have a quick look and take a photo or 2.
تمام يا باشا.
It's deep too.
واو كويس جدا.
ده كبير.
الحمد لله.
This is amazing. We're not at ground level. It's collapsed on the other side.
أنا فاكرة في أوضة تانية هناك في الشمال وفي أوضة تانية هناك في اليمين.
تمام. طبعا.
لكن باب الطريق في النص موجود لكن ما شوفش.
رديم.
رديم كله الرديم.
We can clearly see the entrance to a chamber on the right. In other words, on the east side. And then we have this surrounding wall that's still in place. And I have the impression that over there behind there's some kind of small blockage or obstruction. It's hard to tell from here. We'll explore all of this later. But we really do have two Apis bull burial chambers on either side. And very probably another two over there at the back of that space. Because we're just beyond the gallery here. Mariette said that it was 68 meters long in all, which means there's a good 20 meters or so to the north that's still inaccessible. There could be plenty more Apis bull tombs. Fantastic.
مبروك يا مديرة. ألف مبروك.
السنة الجاية
إن شاء الله.
في الشغل.
بإذن الله شغل كتير.
The passage leading to the unexplored section is immediately blocked up so that no one can get into it in the absence of the Louvre Museum team. The cavity, cleared out by the workers, is filled back in. Next season, the gallery ceilings will be consolidated so that the team can work in it safely. This archaeological adventure can then resume with the promise of excavating the as yet unexplored section of the lesser vaults. At least 6 burial chambers, some of which the scientists hope will contain more of the sacred bull's treasure. No doubt there will be many more fascinating discoveries in store for the Louvre's archaeologists.